Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our virtual learning series, Next Steps in COVID-19 Response in Long-Term Care and Retirement Homes. Welcome to those of you who are joining us for the first time today, and then also welcome back to those who have been joining us regularly since we started this program last summer. So nice to see everyone today. My name is Tanya McDonald. I'm Director of Innovations and Strategic Development here at Healthcare Excellence Canada, and I will be your moderator for today. I would like to start by acknowledging that I will be speaking to you from my home office today, which is in Ottawa, Ontario, on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, and it's an honor for me to be speaking to you from this land today. We're pleased to offer today's webinar with French simultaneous interpretation. If you wish to listen to the session in French, please select French from the interpretation menu at the bottom of your screen. We invite you to use both English and French when entering your questions, comments in the chat box. And also just a reminder that this session will be recorded along with a summary, which will be available to review or share with your colleagues who have missed this session today. Healthcare Excellence Canada is a new organization with a relentless focus on improving healthcare with and for everyone in Canada. We were launched in the spring of 2021, and we bring together the Canadian Patient Safety Institute and the Canadian Foundation for Healthcare Improvement. In the summer of 2020, in response to the pandemic and the profound impact it has had and continues to have in some places on those who live and work in long-term care and retirement homes, LTC Plus Acting on Pandemic Together, Learning Together was launched to support pandemic response and strengthening and as we work towards recovery. Long-Term Care Plus is a community of more than 1,500 long-term care and retirement homes from across the country who are all working together to strengthen their ongoing pandemic response. So it is a real pleasure to be supporting you throughout this recovery. Long-Term Care Plus wouldn't be possible without the many partners that are working with us to collectively support you throughout this journey. So we would like to recognize BC Patient Safety Quality Council, CADIF, Manitoba Institute for Patient Safety, New Brunswick Association of Nursing Homes, and the CMA Foundation for their support and contributions to the program. I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. We're going to be taking a look at how the pandemic has changed the way we approach improvement, healthcare improvement, and then more specifically in long-term care and retirement homes. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Matthew Hill, who will be sharing lessons and insights from thousands of people working to improve healthcare in the UK during this period of change. Matthew will be speaking to key findings from a recent report, the role of improvement during the response to COVID-19. Matthew is the Insight, Evaluation and Research Manager for Q at the Health Foundation in the UK. His primary role is supporting the Q community to continuously improve their work through high quality. The other half of his role is to lead Q's collective insight work that draws on all the improvement expertise and experience in the community and shares it more widely to inform policy and practice across health and care. Before I hand it over to Matthew, I would like to introduce our other two guest speakers who are on the call today, who will help guide the discussion with some reflections on the impacts of this report on long-term care and retirement homes across Canada. Jennifer Cornell is the Director of Long-Term Care for the County of Grey in southwestern Ontario. Grey County operates 3 long-term care homes that are home to 316 people. Jennifer is a respected long-term care and health system leader with over 20 years of progressively senior leadership roles. Jennifer is a servant leader focused on quality care, and service emphasis is on quality initiatives, team development, and growth. Christina is the Vice President of Performance Improvement and Innovation at Responsive Group, Inc. Christina's extensive career in business has encompassed many sectors, from healthcare and hospitality to manufacturing, banking, and insurance, in Canada and abroad. Christina's focus is on collaboratively identifying and driving performance improvement and innovation through a customer and stakeholder-centric approach. With her formative outside of seniors and healthcare, she brings an outsider's view to addressing the challenges they are facing in the sector and a deep appreciation for the personal enrichment that comes from working with passionate teams in a social impact environment. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And now Matthew, I will hand it over to you.
Fantastic. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Tanya. And actually, thank you, everyone, for the invitation to join the webinar today and speak to you all. It's a great honor, obviously, for me to share some of our work with you all, and I really hope that some of the findings are useful for the particular context of long-term care and retirement homes in Canada. I guess as much as sharing our work with you, I'm actually really looking forward to hearing the reflections of the panel and also hearing from you all about what resonates and chimes with your experience, as well as anything that you would kind of question based on that experience. So I hope we can all kind of think together about what we all need to learn and crucially kind of do differently as a result of this profound moment of change and challenge that we've all been through during COVID-19. Okay, next slide, that's great, thanks. So Tanya very kindly introduced me, but just to give a bit more detail about where I'm joining you from. So I work for the Q community. Q is a connected community of thousands working together to improve health and care quality across the UK and Ireland. We started in 2015 with around 250 founding members, who you can see there in forming the Q shape. We've now grown to over 4,500 members today. We offer members a wide range of events, training opportunities, structured opportunities for connections, learning resources, inter-organisational visits, insight generation activities, as well as small pots of funding to really support them in their existing improvement work. And we hope all of that makes it easier for members to share ideas across the community, learn together, and ultimately collaborate to make change that benefits patients and residents across health and care. We're led by the Health Foundation, with NHS England and Improvement and other partners across the UK also offering support. We were set up in response to the BERIC review, a review of safety in England, and we now have funding up until 2030. So we're in a privileged position in that sense, aiming to grow the membership to over 10,000 by 2030. So before I get into sharing some of our insights from the UK and Ireland, I really just wanted to hear a bit more actually from you all about your experience of the pandemic so far. So we have an activity called, we call it the Mad Tea. I think you might know it as a waterfall. So I'll read out the start of a sentence, which I want you all to complete in the chat box. Please do just give it a go. You know, it's a great way to warm up your brains, warm up your fingers, and for everyone to just get to know each other a little bit better. So just go for it. Please don't overthink it. Okay, so thinking back over the pandemic so far, the first sentence I want you to complete for me is, the thing I've found most challenging has been. So just pop your answer in the chat. The thing I've found most challenging has been. Great to see them coming in. Yeah, lots about just the speed of change, the uncertainty, obviously some issues around isolation as well. I'll also invite Tanya in to share any French responses that are coming through.
We're good at this time for French.
Great, thanks. Yeah, lots coming through around that kind of uncertainty, wasn't it? And obviously the speed and the nature of change. Fantastic, thanks for sharing there. The second sentence is, this is perhaps a trickier one. One of the things I've learned about how change happens is. One of the things I've learned about how change happens is. Yeah, how rapidly it can change. Yes, this imperative, this purpose can really drive it, obviously, as it did during COVID. Again, that sense of kind of urgency. This is great, there's loads coming through. Communication is the key. The importance of engaging and people having the willingness to change. Yes, speed again. Great, fantastic. I'll just give you a few more seconds for those to come through. Great stuff. And then the last one, which really gets us onto the topic of today, is, you know, looking back over COVID-19 so far, the role improvement has played for me was, Yep, help focus on service users, resilience, crucial, foundational. That's great. Any more on that? You're moving away from the traditional way. That's interesting. Yeah, I think things have been shaken up a bit, haven't they, obviously? Flexibility. And finally, on partnerships and collaboration. Fantastic. Okay. Keep those coming through, but we will crack on with the session. So I hope everyone feels nicely warmed up now. So today I'm going to share the results of an insight survey that we undertook with the Q community last year. And as the pandemic was hitting, we heard these kind of competing narratives about the role that improvement was playing across health and care. So on the one hand, we were hearing that in some instances, improvement was really coming to the fore to help organizations respond at pace. But on the other hand, there was also examples of improvement, or at least kind of some aspects of it, being marginalized and sidestepped. Now, obviously at Q, we think that improvement approaches can play an important role in driving better quality of care. So it was really crucial for us to understand kind of what role improvement was playing at this critical moment. So to try and understand that systematically, we sent a survey to all of the Q members made up of 29 closed questions and some free text questions. We received 225 responses, and to bolster those responses, we undertook 12 follow-up interviews to get into a bit more detail on some of the issues that the survey was raising. I should say that in the survey, and actually more widely at Q, we adopt a broad framing of improvement, which includes improvement tools, methods, as well as broader improvement approaches and mindsets. There's a lot more detail in the full report, which I think has been linked to in the chat. So I'll just draw out some of the key findings and key recommendations for you today. And I hope that these will act kind of not as a final word on the role of improvement during COVID, but hopefully as a really nice springboard for us to have a rich discussion for the rest of the session. Next slide, please. So the three key findings then from our work. Well, the first one, and a really important one, is that we found improvement played an important role for respondents during COVID-19. And actually many respondents perceived its role to have increased at the individual, team and organizational levels. We found that improvement was used particularly extensively for rapidly reviewing and improving processes and practice. So the model for improvement, specifically PDSA cycles, were the most cited tools for this. And these were seen as especially useful due to the increased need to reflect on what was and wasn't working well, especially at the start of the crisis, as well as just being valued for their speed and simplicity. We also found that improvement was widely used for engaging staff and enabling teams to work effectively together. And I think this really showcases the benefits of improvement for its focus on the people who are actually involved in change. So we found that it was tools that supported open and frequent communication, such as huddles, after-action reviews, Schwartz rounds, and different liberating structures. These were really useful for promoting psychological safety and staff well-being in what was obviously a stressful and rapidly changing environment that people have already alluded to, as well as just being very time-efficient ways to engage staff in work. One of the areas where improvement was used less was in measurement and evaluation. And there are a range of reasons for that, including challenges in systematically measuring variation, just because the lack of control that people had around the variables they were measuring because things were changing so quickly. Obviously, some logistical issues in terms of data collection through social distancing and stay-at-home orders in the UK. And just that the priority was given to service delivery over kind of measurement and evaluation, with one respondent saying, there simply wasn't time to devote to ensuring accurate measurement or implementation or even plan. It was as if kind of muscle memory kicked in during the pandemic. We also saw relatively lower application of improvement for engaging patients and carers. And so while in the UK, at least, this is something that's arguably a bit lower anyway, people's ability to do it was made more difficult by the pace of change and obviously some of the social distancing restrictions that were in place in the UK. So it's a bit of an open question. Is that enough of a reason not to kind of systematically engage patients and carers? I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts on that. We can kind of come back to that later, but they were the reasons that people gave in our survey. The second key finding was that improvement took this distinct form. in response to the crisis context. So our analysis shows that improvement during COVID was organised around short-term goals, with methods often used quite flexibly and sometimes in actually quite a partial way. So it was how individuals drew on their kind of broader, wider improvement expertise and mindsets that was most valued, as opposed to more specific technical or rigid kind of improvement methods or methodologies. Again, that raises interesting questions, because I think while that flexible approach really allowed improvers to work responsively to support teams to achieve improvement goals at pace, some other respondents to the survey raised concerns about the longer term sustainability and effectiveness of some of those changes that were structured around more shorter term goals. Thirdly, our findings suggest that improvement played an more important, more valuable and more strategic role during COVID-19 in organisations that had a well-developed approach to improvement pre-pandemic. So those organisations with a more well-developed approach, they were more likely to have used improvement tools for planning for the future and deciding where to focus efforts. They were more likely to report using it for engaging staff and enabling the teams to work effectively together, and that was correlated with increased collaboration. And finally, that they were also more likely to agree that they'd been able to make use of their personal improvement capabilities and that the team had applied a systematic approach. So I think another way of thinking about that, which I quite like, is to think that those with better developed kind of individual and organizational improvement muscles that had been built up pre-pandemic were able to then kind of apply and flex those muscles and skills almost with more greater rigor and intentionality during the crisis. And we believe are now in a stronger position to obviously build on some of those positive changes. Great. Okay. So following on from those three key findings, we've drawn out these three key recommendations for the next phase of COVID-19 response. So firstly, we think that improvers and those who support them should really build on the positive momentum from the pandemic and ensure that improvement plays a central role in what is often called in the UK the kind of recovery phase. So we do think it's important to amplify that positive story about the role of improvement. In particular, we think the power of improvement to engage a wide range of staff perspectives, to enable collaboration, and to ensure buy-in for change will be really critical in this next phase. We think organisational and system leaders must ensure that they continue to provide an enabling context through empowering leadership, resources, and a commitment to building improvement capabilities and positive cultures for the long term. And it's probably just worth spending a little bit of time on what we might mean by empowering leadership, because it actually was consistently identified as really important enabler during the crisis. And interestingly, I think there's no doubt that the results from our survey support some wider evidence from the UK at least that tells actually quite a positive story about some of the new forms of leadership that emerged during COVID in teams, in organisations, and actually at the system level. So we found that it was forms of leadership that offered autonomy to teams, as well as kind of embodying inclusive and compassionate leadership that were identified as key enabling factors for supporting positive change. And in the more detailed responses that we got in the survey, we saw a range of factors that underpinned this, including the importance of that shared purpose, leaders removing some of the existing barriers, including reporting and regulatory requirements, providing resources, and generally engendering a more kind of permissive culture in the organisation. And actually all of that resonated well with some other Health Foundation work that highlighted top-down clarity and bottom-up agency as being key for supporting positive change in the pandemic. And I guess on the flip side, we heard where kind of existing or even intensified command and control style leadership emerged, that was a key barrier for some in their COVID response. And we also have heard some fears about some of that command and control style leadership coming back in as the initial waves of the pandemic recede. Secondly, we think that improvers locally and nationally should reflect on which ways of working and specific solutions that have been developed during the pandemic should continue. So it's that balance between that kind of flexibility that we said was really appropriate with some of the focus on the longer term. So it's about balancing, I think, those more accessible, flexible approaches that were certainly appropriate during the crisis context with the need to really introduce and reintroduce sufficient rigor, particularly I think around those areas we identified around measurement for improvement and substantial and systematic patient and carer involvement to really underpin effective long-term change. And thirdly, during the next phase of the pandemic, we think that improvement needs to be embedded in core ongoing work in ways that are relevant and accessible to those on the front line. We think that this can be achieved to some extent by simplifying some of the language that we use and consolidating some of those methods where appropriate, as well as by more intentionally adapting improvement approaches to fit existing organizational constraints. So really thinking about where the organization is at in terms of improvement, its capabilities, its culture, and kind of flexing the type of improvement we try and draw on in those contexts to fit that context that is being applied within. And we also think as part of that, that improvers should galvanize their efforts around shared system priorities for the next phase of pandemic recovery and longer term service transformation. And just to draw that out, I just wanted to hone in on one of the questions that we asked in our survey. We asked Q members, given what you've seen and learned through the pandemic, what are the 3 issues that you think the improvement community should prioritize? I won't go through all of them in detail, but there's just a few things that jump out for me from this. The first is that in the UK, at least, I think pre-pandemic, there was a perception that system priorities and the priorities of improvers weren't always so well aligned. But I think these results show actually there's much closer alignment between the priorities of those 2 groups. And secondly, at Q, we are committed to supporting improvers to more directly contribute to these system priorities. And that we should really keep these longer term priorities in mind when we think about addressing the more immediate short-term challenges of this next phase of the pandemic. So that could be addressing the backlogs in care or staff burnout, obviously really key immediate priorities that we're all facing, isn't it? But we think it's really important to keep in mind this longer term potential in responding to those shorter term priorities. How can we keep in mind some of these longer term system priorities that we all want to make progress around? Next slide. Right, that's about it from me. But before I pass back to the panel, we're just going to revisit the MADT waterfall structure that we touched on at the start. So now turning to the next steps, the next stages in the COVID-19 response, I just want you to finish these 3 sentences for me. So please do get your fingers ready on the chat. It'd be lovely to hear more from you. So the first one, I guess thinking about what you've heard from me, but also your experience across the last 12 to 18 months. Thinking about the next steps in the COVID-19 response, finish this sentence for me. We need to know more about. We need to know more about culture change, that longer term approach. Yes, what longer term changes are coming? Lots of specific points coming here. Yes, the longer term focus on sustainability. And I guess sharing all of the things that have been learned. Yeah, I think we know it's been a profound time for learning, hasn't it? So really making sure we learn the right lessons and that those lessons are kind of shared and kind of are there for people on the front line to act on. That's great. Tanya, please do jump in if you want to share anything. Otherwise, I will crack on with the next one. The second one is something I plan to do differently is. Something I plan to do differently is. So other things that we're going to change as a result, we may have already changed, I guess. Yeah, there's something there around engaging with partners, relationships. Actually, lots of individual things coming through. I'll just give you another 20 seconds or so. Different approaches to decision making involving the front line. Yeah, really, I guess, continuously reviewing that kind of what went well, what didn't go well structure. And yeah, kind of building the capacity, I guess, potentially for the next thing to come along. Great. And then finally, this is a classic kind of question structure for this activity, but it can get some nice responses. When all is said and done, we need to. When all is said and done, we need to. Yeah, Jody, keep the focus on the clients and residents. Yeah, lots coming about that obviously focus on patients, residents, families, carers. Actually, a lot coming through around the reaffirmation, I guess, of the importance of involving patients, carers, and families and residents in decisions and all of our work. Great, please do keep those coming through. But that's it, everything from me. So thanks so much for listening. Really looking forward to getting into the discussion now. And thanks for all of your responses on the MAD-T.
Well, thank you so much, Matthew, to you and your team at the Health Foundation and the Q community for their contributions in producing such an important piece of work. This conversation has brought a smile to my face, just taking some keynotes around, the importance of improvement and recovery and enabling context and building capabilities. And also just all of your active participation in the chat to everyone participating today. And I love the one that stood out was celebrate long-term care. So yes. So now we're going to dive into a conversation with our two guest panel speakers to hear about their experiences in relation to this report, but in the Canadian context. So Matthew's presentation and report touches on the fact that improvement took a distinct form during the pandemic. Based on many conversations, articles, discussion forums, this seems to resonate, not just in Canada, but on an international level. So maybe Christina, I'll start with you. In your organization and from your experience, what does pandemic improvement look like? And what are aspects of it that you would like to keep in this recovery phase?
Right. Very good. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Matthew, and Healthcare Excellence Canada for allowing this discussion, this conversation today. It's really a pleasure to be with everyone. I think when I look at our organization, we are Ontario-based, and there are 36 communities between long-term care and retirement homes. What does pandemic improvement look like? I would say it looks like a couple of things. First of all, for us, it has meant sharing knowledge very quickly and very easily across, in our case, our 36 communities. So our answer to how to do that was just coming out of wave one during those summer months, exactly 12 months ago, taking everything we'd learned, looking at all the playbooks in North America, partnering with other operators, and understanding how do we take everything that some of our homes in outbreak have learned and share that with all of the communities so they're ready for wave two. And so what we did was we created a pandemic playbook, and the playbook consists in simple checklists for the management team in each home. Every manager was delivered their own outbreak checklist, what they need to do, what's their responsibility in the first 4 hours, 24 hours, 48, and so on, so that they had that going into an outbreak peace of mind, that they knew what was in front of them and what was expected of them. At the same time, we developed preparedness checklists. So when COVID is not in the community, how do you make sure and do everything you can in all the various areas as a manager in your functional area to make sure that you're keeping the home as safe as possible? And so we took that checklist-based, simple approach, let everyone know exactly what they need to do by pooling information from everyone's experiences. And we took the information across long-term care into retirement. We found that a lot of what our long-term care homes were being faced with was also applicable in retirement. So we came up actually with universal checklists, with perhaps a little bit more of a challenge in retirement because we tend to have less team members. So for us, that sharing knowledge quickly and easily was paramount. hand in hand with that was, once you hand over these checklists and these enabling tools, how do you follow up and make sure that the team members have absorbed them? You know, back to what Matthew was saying, how do you measure some of this? You know, in this case, that's when there's a degree of trust, right? There's a lot happening. Those managers in the homes are facing a lot of different factors, and they're also assimilating important checklists. We didn't scientifically necessarily measure that. We did follow up that it's a balancing act of you know, pushing, including, etc. I think a second aspect of what pandemic improvement looked like for us was deciding quickly and collegially how to confront a situation when there were many different voices, different jurisdictions, public health units, hospitals, IPAC teams, coming at the same problem with different solutions. And, you know, where do we simply follow the local practice that we've been asked to follow? And where do we try to take perhaps one of those local practices and deploy it across all 36 homes? And at the very beginning, I would say we were more hesitant about our ability to be nimble and do that. We were very much trying to, you know, follow each area. But then I would say that by wave 2, we felt pretty confident that if there was a best practice in one area, we should just adopt it and move with it across all of our jurisdictions. So really deciding quickly and collegially was what pandemic improvement looked like. And I think the third area of pandemic improvement was really looking for solutions to problems outside of our traditional sources. Right? So looking outside of the experts, looking sometimes beyond, you know, the public health, the IPAC, the hospital teams, looking beyond our traditional supply chain. They didn't always have the answers. And so we needed to explore new avenues. We listened much more, I would argue, to local practices and, you know, responses that were being crafted in the homes. And so we came to a much more nimble, I would say, and grassroots approach to problem solving. What would we like to keep? So that's a lovely question. We would like to keep a number of things. The flattened hierarchies. This pandemic for us has highlighted that absolutely, you know, the concept of the servant leadership is I would argue, the model for everyone. It's the frontline staff are the ones that saw us through, with managers who went shoulder to shoulder and rolled up their sleeves and worked together. And it's that kind of flattening and that kind of trust that was built through that we want to absolutely carry forward. Another item that we'd like to keep, the pandemic has unleashed a lot of emotions, and emotions in our homes, in our business model are, in our opinion, in my opinion, fundamental. We are in the business of love and caring. We don't use this terminology. We have a lot of rules and aspects that govern our language, but you know, that is a key item. We want to take the emotions and build on the focus on the patient, the resident quality of life. This is their home. These are not institutions. And I think, you know, we want to carry the emotional piece together into our definition of what is quality as we come out of the pandemic. I think we've been somewhat restrictive, and as operators, you know, we are the advocates of our residents and of our staff. And so together, let's define quality and make the conversations more engaging. I would say, Tanya, forgive me, maybe I've been a bit long, but those are, you know, what we have experienced.
That's great, Christina. And so now I will ask the same question to Jennifer, so I could just repeat it. So in your organization and from your experience, what does pandemic improvement look like, and what aspects would you like to keep? Jennifer, over to you.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay, Tanya, okay.
Excellent.
Great, thanks. Sorry, I missed part of Christina's answer because my internet went down, but that's such is the way of technology these days. So thanks so much for having me as a part of this discussion, and thanks, Matthew, for such a great report and overview. For us in our 3 long-term care homes, our pandemic response was very similar to the experience that you reflected in your report, that it was very much in the moment in order to solve problems urgently and with some pressure to find some good solutions. And what that allowed us to do, what had happened then was organically created engagement with those people that are directly involved in that change, in whatever that response needed to be, whatever that change needed to be. And so that was huddles, touch bases, check-ins with the staff, with the team, with the residents, and with the family members and loved ones of the people that we provide care. So it allowed us to quickly identify what the problem is or what the need for change was, do some brainstorming, throw out opportunities and solutions, try some things, regroup, adapt, and then give it a go again to see, how it's going. And in the moment, it felt very much like crisis response. But when we reflect and look back, it really was demonstrating lots of the tools and the methods of quality improvement. That's really plan, do, study, act, and repeat. And so I think in terms of what do we want to keep moving forward is remembering that we can be nimble and flexible, and that we can do change and affect change in a really positive way without that rigor and formality that often makes people go, oh, it's too much. It's too much for me. We don't have time for that. So I'll leave it at that. But that was our experience.
Thank you, Jennifer. And while we have you with your internet working, I will ask you the next question first. So actually, and it's building on a lot of the comments that we're seeing through the chat as well, just about the role of family councils and how family and essential care partners were locked out of long-term care facilities and retirement homes during the pandemic. And we know that there was impacts to those decisions that were made from a public health perspective. So and then we also heard from Matthew that, the patient engagement piece was one of the pieces that was probably less favored during the pandemic from an improvement perspective. So what do you think some of those barriers were to meaningful patient engagement or family essential care partner engagement during the pandemic? And what are some innovative ways that we can, I guess, maybe either rejuvenate or strategies that worked for you during the pandemic, given these restrictions?
Yeah, thanks. And, I've seen lots of the comments going by, and I agree that it was a challenge, and those barriers are just what you described: the visiting restrictions, the isolation, the challenges with some of our solutions were around technology, and so then challenges with technology. I've just experienced that. So those are definitely the barriers. What I do want to say, though, from our experience is, engagement with family members and residents may have been less favored. And I think that's reflective in Canada as well as what Matthew's sharing in the UK. For me, it was this is the one thing that we can't ever let go of. So we found a way to engage with families, engage with residents in a meaningful way in a crisis. And we need to then shift that from being a crisis response to being an everyday expectation of how we provide care and service, because we are asking the people that are receiving the care and service what's important to them. So some of the strategies that we used were we introduced virtual town halls, monthly and regular email newsletters, mailed out newsletters, communication using different communication strategies like text, email, phone calls. We did surveys around our essential visitor program. So I think what the pandemic taught us is that we can find creative and innovative ways to engage residents, patients, and their family members. And so there is no reason why we shouldn't find a way to build that into how we provide care and service post-pandemic.
Christina, same question to you. Reflections.
Yes. So, I mean, you know, how do we make residents and families more participant going forward in our quality improvement efforts? I think it goes back to, you know, we've established this stronger communication. I think we've built trust over the months of the pandemic. And the question is probably about, you know, making quality improvement relevant to residents and to the families. What I heard from my colleagues is that in the old world, pre-COVID, you know, we had these quality improvement plans. They were compliance focused, and it was hard to engage not only residents and families in those quality improvement plans, but even staff, because they tended to be technical, aspect related. But the beauty of this is that, you know, first and foremost, it's about quality of life. And so when you have an exciting, engaging goal that is meaningful and relevant to you, we will be able to bring that degree of communication, trust, and openness that the pandemic has really accelerated into a dialogue now around this is a clear objective that we have. And so how do we work together to solve to it? I think we'll be able to harness that emotional aspect that I've talked about. Passions are high right now, but we bring them into a structured dialogue by making sure that the definition of quality is relevant to those parties, and hence make the journey one that, you know, is engaging.
Matthew, did you have anything to add to the conversation around engagement with family members?
Just a couple of things, if it's all right. I mean, I think, as I said, you know, what we heard from our report, there was, you know, people did face, you know, obviously genuine barriers about effectively engaging, you know, patients, carers, families, residents in the work. So it's not to do those down. Equally, I think some of the more positive examples we heard around that, in a way, did act as a bit of a challenge, a bit of a call to arms, almost, to some of those challenges that people identified. So I think, you know, the responses focus quite a lot on remote and virtual engagement. And I think there are some of the really good examples around that adopted a very proactive approach. So what would that include? That would include things like, you know, actually providing and supplying equipment so that people could engage effectively, supporting them through training, even sending someone round to set up some of the software so that it makes sure that the people have got a good setup at home. So that would be one example of quite a proactive approach. I think, yeah, really just thinking about how we can adapt some of those tools that we know work for engaging people meaningfully face-to-face. How can we think about how we can adapt those virtually? Yeah, some places certainly did that better than others. And the only other example was, and this will never replace kind of one-to-one engagement, but there was some work done around a whole service shift really towards virtual consultations across Scotland called NHS Near Me. Like I say, that you're always going to have that one-to-one engagement with people's needs, but they actually also did a kind of mass public virtual consultation to really engage people in this broader service change towards virtual consultations. So thinking about how we can kind of engage people more generally in those bigger service changes, and then use some of that information to apply it to some of those like one-to-one engagement. So just a few examples I wanted to share.
Great. So Christina, oh, you wanted to add? I was going to ask you the next question, but you go ahead.
I wanted to add, because I saw in the chat a question about how do we define quality of life, right? How do we define? Sounds like such a beautiful big word. And for me, it really starts with, as operators, we need to be right in the chair of our residents. It means, what is the lived experience of that resident 24 hours a day? How are they feeling? How is the day unfolding? Do they have hope? Are they looking forward to the next day? Are they involved in doing things? Both sectors, actually, both long-term care and retirement, they've almost taken way too much to heart the doing everything for the resident. Everything is done for the resident. And in long-term care, to a certain extent, God forbid the resident do something. Forgive me, maybe I'm going out on a limb, but we need people to be doing, to remain active the whole day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So an invitation, and it may be a segue, Tanya, to your question on, how do we change quality improvement going forward? I would like us to take a step back. A few years ago, lean thinking, the lean approach, customer-centered process improvement, was a discussion point in healthcare. 2014, 2015, 16, BC was deploying a lean thinking in healthcare. Ontario, a little bit less so. I think Saskatchewan was really pushing this. We haven't heard about lean for a long time. And lean is all about empowering every one of your staff members, but also your residents and your families, to think, what is and what is not adding value in each process that happens every day when you look at it from the resident perspective, the family perspective, and the staff perspective. And giving our staff, first and foremost, the tools to identify what is wasteful, what is not adding value, how can I speak up and feel confident? So really moving, I think, from a top-down approach in a certain way to a lean approach. And it's a very simple methodology, and I would love to see a comeback for lean as we come out of COVID. Hopefully I maybe answered your question as well.
Well, no, it's great, Christina. And I was actually going to ask you that question that was posed by Erin in the chat. So I'll reread it for Jennifer in case she lost track of the chat. I know you're having internet issues, but so the question was, how do we ensure that we do not lose sight of quality of life as the foundational focus of our quality improvement work in the face of life and death and safety issues? So how do you reconcile those? And then perhaps maybe building on that, how do we make quality improvement more accessible in the future for long-term care?
Thanks. And it's such an important question. And I saw someone else's comment building on that around having the ability to keep focused on that is to shift the power to the resident, the patient, and to give them space for their voice. And I think that how we do that in an organization is to be on purpose and have our shared purpose. And if our shared purpose, and this is what can make it accessible, if it's in plain language and it's something we all can work towards, like quality of life, resident-led, person-centered, then it gives us an opportunity to reflect on what we're doing and apply those questions. Is this resident-led? Has the resident had a chance to have their voice? Have we listened? And that is the foundation. Is it equitable? Is it reliable in that if we want to scale this change to how can we apply that positive change across more than one organization or more than one department? So I think, how do we not lose sight of quality of life being the focus and the resident's voice being the focus? They must always be part of the discussion and part of the conversation. And that our purpose is always coming back to resident-centered, resident-led. And I think that's what Christina is speaking to in simplifying. So and to answer the question around accessibility, how do we when it feels too complex and too rigid, then it's easy to say we don't have time for that. If it's as simple as, have we listened to the voice of the resident? Have we asked? Have we become curious and asked questions? Then that allows us to take a breath and do that. Pick our heads up and look around and see, are we on the right track? Or are we making a change that suits us, the organization, the staff, the system, rather than the individuals?
Did you have something to add, Matt, around the conversation around accessibility of QI? No. So I also just wanted to pick up on the concept of leadership, and there's something that you found in your report, Matthew, that kind of struck me, is this top-down clarity and bottom-up agency. And speaking of the empowerment for the teams to make decisions and move forward. And so your report touched on this a little bit, so maybe I'll go to Jennifer first, but what has been your experience with decision-making during the pandemic? And if there's been delegation, and was it a command control style, and seeing, maybe that's potentially was not the most effective strategy during the pandemic? And what aspects of these more positive leadership practices do you imagine remaining post-pandemic into this recovery period? And I think maybe we'll go to Christina first, because I think that Jennifer may have lost internet connection.
Right. Well, I think, for us, I have to say at the very beginning, Tanya, the instinct is a little bit to try to command and control as much as you can, right? You've got the safety of people's lives, which is first and foremost. So it's keeping people alive as the first mandate. But then, that quickly needs to shift to trying to preserve some quality, let alone, build a model of living which is different from the one we've had. So in terms of, how we go about that, again, I think it's using that flattened hierarchy to actually acknowledge with our staff that, their solutions and their perspective count. And that, it's really a little bit flipping the concept of the answers, always coming kind of from the, designated management, and allowing that to come from our staff. But you need you do need an approach and a culture that supports that. You can't just say it, we're now going to hear from our staff and empower them. You actually have to deploy that and lead by example in how you do that. And especially in Ontario long-term care, I don't believe that nimble model is a model that was with us. And so you're really going to, have to plant seeds one at a time and showcase examples of where staff-led or resident or family-led improvement wins and succeeds and gets propagated. I think, again, the pandemic has helped break down the us and them. The us and residents are them and families are them. We are all one, and so that's a great starting point.
Thank you very much, Christina. Oh, Matt, Matthew, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, if that's all right. I mean, I think this question of leadership, like I say, it came out consistently in our work, and it's it's clearly a really important kind of lead enabler of positive change during the pandemic. And like I said, I think that there's a positive story to tell about it, that in the UK, some really positive new forms of leadership, I think, emerged. And that phrase you picked out really seemed to resonate with people, the top-down clarity and bottom-up agency. I guess it's worth maybe spending a bit of time thinking about what that means, particularly on the bottom-up agency side, because I think, some people described the bottom-up agency was kind of permission. It was just a permission, almost leadership kind of getting out the way. But I think we probably want more from our leaders, don't we, than just getting out the way. So I think there's a more proactive elements to it as well, including, you know, to have bottom-up agency, obviously you need the skills, don't you? Need the resources. You definitely need permission. You need the time. You need the networks and connections to share. Leadership have time to learn from others, share with others, to try things, to fail. So there's a lot more to it, I think, than just permission to give it a go. Although that's one element of it. It's those like more proactive dimensions to it as well that really build that bottom-up agency. Yeah, so just wanted to stress those.
That's great. So Jennifer, last reflections to you with respect to leadership and any positive strategies you have observed during the pandemic, and what would you like to stay moving forward?
Sure, thanks. And I apologize, I'm going to leave my camera off. Haven't had internet challenges in months, but here we are. So I missed some of the responses, and apologies for that. And what I heard Matthew speaking of now is really that culture shift. And so that clarity of purpose, I just can't emphasize enough that if everyone is rowing in the same direction with the same goal, which is, you know, resident-centered or patient-led, resident-led care, then it gives us the permission to be trying things and flexible. And if it doesn't quite go the way we hope, then we have an opportunity to course correct, but always still moving towards that clear purpose. And we also need to remember that culture change doesn't happen overnight. So we need to look back on the successes that we had during the pandemic and also the things that weren't successes. What can we learn from that? And how can we embed that into our plans moving forward, knowing that we need to just keep talking about it, keep open communication, keep giving permission, keep celebrating when we have a moment to celebrate. And that's how we will move forward with the culture shift that we're hoping for.
You can have 30 seconds, Christina.
Yes, I see some of the questions, you know, how do we get to the quality of life? How do people who care for the residents? I think we need to challenge ourselves and look at the residents as not being defined by their illnesses. They are too much defined by their limitations and not by who they are. There is a wealth of humanity in every single resident, retirement or long-term care. We need to read it, open it, and it will really foster, you know, a new phase. I think a new era. Thank you.
And what a great remark to end this really engaging session. Thank you so much, Jennifer, Christina, and Matthew. And thank you to all the participants in the chat. It's been really great to see the engagement throughout this entire session. So we really appreciate the conversation that's been happening. So thank you very much for joining us today. So just to let you know that we are in the process of refining our organized strategy rollout. So we will continue to take forward with us your comments and feedback in the chat and these ongoing discussions as we move forward. Would also like to discuss today, I'm just going to close this. So that we have a spotlight series coming up on July 20th, Home and Community-Based Palliative Care, Shaping the Future from Lessons Learned During the COVID-19 Pandemic. So this is a new report that we have published, and we will be doing a deeper dive on the topic next week. August 16th is our next steps in COVID-19 response webinar, where Dr. Samir Sinha and team at Health Standards Organization, who are leading the development of the National Long-Term Care Standards, will be providing a bit of an overview of work to date and a bit of a timeline of what's coming up next, as they have open surveys right now collecting feedback on the standards. We also have an Essential Together learning bundle that is a resource that's available that supports organizations to welcome essential care partners and as part of the care team. So please visit that on our website. And also I4 Launchpad, Competition for Innovations, Enhancing Care in the Community. Is a new Launchpad is a new pitch competition for providers, patients, researchers, or anyone in healthcare improvement who have innovative ideas that support mental health, wellness, and community health and care or equity. So there's a funding opportunity there not to be missed. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating today. Please reach out if you have any questions. And it was a pleasure engaging in this conversation with everyone today. Thank you very much.